You're listening to the ESO Network, your station for all things geek.
Hello, please let me see your ticket stubs for the double-edged double bill. This week, Eddie Murphy is Dolemite in the Haunted Mansion. Each week, Adam Thomas and Thomas Mariani will come to the table to discuss the randomly selected yin and yang of a double feature. Then both will have to pick a number between 1 and 10 in order to seal their fates for the next episode, when we'll have 2 good movies, the other 2 bad ones. Let the chaos begin. I am Thomas Mariani, and Adam, your carnivorous pallor portrays an aura of foreboding, which is my favorite bit from Delirious.
Yeah, for sure. I'm Adam Thomas, and this is a nice boulder. I like this boulder. My favorite bit from Norbit.
Oh, of course, yes. Everyone's favorite Eddie Murphy film in general.
Yes, absolutely.
For sure. So, Adam, today on the Double-Edged Double Bill, where we cover a good and a bad movie that we picked at the end of our last episode, we are covering somebody who we really wanted to do an episode about for a very long time. I would argue since the beginning, right?
Yeah, I was going to say, I think since the beginning when we were coming up with topics, I want to say he was one of the first ones we mentioned, but we were like, well, let's wait till something comes out. And then things started coming out, but it just never felt like the right time to fit in the schedule because we had other things lined up.
Yes, and of course that person is Eddie Murphy. We decided to do this episode this week because the week we're releasing this, Coming to America's coming out, specifically with the numerical to differentiate, because that's so helpful to everybody.
Yes, absolutely. I'm not very optimistic. I have very sort of reserved feelings about that one.
My only hopes for that one, because the trailer wasn't that enticing, but my hope is that based on some of the cast and also the director involved, are involved in one of the features we're actually covering tonight, makes me at least hopeful it'll be a surprise.
I'm hoping, man. That PG-13 is scary.
It's scary. It's spooky. And that's not something that Eddie Murphy is unfamiliar with. We should definitely talk about, because the 2 movies we're covering are sort of in the back half of his career. But Eddie Murphy, before he did either of our 2 features, had a solid 20 years of massive success, which is really interesting given he started on SNL, obviously, when he was 19.
Yep.
That's amazing.
I believe he was the youngest cast member ever until Pete Davidson.
I think so. There's not a lot of competition, if anything else. Maybe Anthony Michael Hall, but even then, I'm not sure. If we're counting that, which most people don't. Really.
No.
But no, yeah, he was 19 when he started SNL, which is amazing, especially, like, if you've seen any of those older episodes, like, that was right after the big Ready for Primetime players left, like Belushi and Aykroyd, all those big people, and it was very dire for that show, like the season afterward. If you've seen any of that stuff, it's rough. And then I think the season after that, they retooled and fired the cast, but kept, I believe, Eddie Murphy and Joe Piscopo were like the 2 people that carried over. And Murphy was literally carrying that show on his back, because he was like the only thing people cared about at that time.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And you go back and watch this stuff, some of it, I would say isn't very topical anymore, but a lot of it is still so funny, and he's great in it. You can't take your eyes off Eddie Murphy. In fact, one of my favorite Saturday Night Live skits ever is Eddie Murphy. It's the James Brown hot tub.
Yes.
It's such a stupid, simple idea, but he puts so much gusto into it, and it's so ridiculously funny.
I think one of my favorite bits is, it's not the whole sketch, but it's just a moment where he's doing some sketch where he's talking to the camera, and he flubs a line, and people laugh, and he says, "So if I messed up, shut up."
Yeah.
And everyone's even more on his side. That's what's so great, is that he has that kind of like young determination that makes it work. And then obviously that led into his film career with like 48 Hours was the first big one, which was your alternate choice that we almost picked for the episode. And it really steamrolled, especially after Beverly Hills Cop, which is a famous example of like Sylvester Stallone wanted to do this, but then he dropped out. And so we have this basic ass cop script. Eddie, do you want to like make it funny? And he made it so funny that that movie got nominated for, like, Best Original Screenplay because of his ad-libs.
It's so good. And I mean, the thing is, you said it best, dude. I mean, for 20 solid years, he was such a huge, huge star. And I mean, he's never really, I wouldn't say he's necessarily faded, because he's still popped up in, like, great critical reaction and like Dreamgirls, and obviously he's the voice of Donkey in the Shrek franchise and things like that. He has done some junk, but he's always still been relevant.
I would say for at least a solid, I wouldn't even say just 20 years, like 40-year period, from the 80s through like the 2000s. He was pretty, like, consistent. I mean, this last decade, I'm not as sure of, aside from, like, a couple of, like, bright spots, because he just didn't do that many movies, honestly, which you don't blame him, given going from, like, 19 to around, like, 40, 50, and being, like, consistently in big, huge movies. I could see, like, I'm gonna take a break for a decade, basically. But it seems like, especially given one of our features we're talking about, he might be on an upswing, which I'm for if he can keep up, as we'll talk about later, that kind of upswing he currently has.
Absolutely. If he keeps delivering performances and sort of not obvious big mainstream movies for Eddie Murphy, I'm all about it. For sure.
Yeah, especially considering just, like, the weird breadth, especially in the 80s, where, like, not only was he a massive, like, TV star, but also a big movie star, a big stand-up star, and even musical star, if you've, for a brief period, with Party All the Time, which is bizarre. Also, his whole, like, the albums he did after that are bizarre. It's such a weird, like, music career.
Yeah, he did that one with Michael Jackson.
What's Up With You? Yes, a very weird video in particular.
Yes, sir.
But I'm curious, Adam, what about your personal journey? Where did that kind of start for you with Eddie Murphy? Where do you remember first glomming on to Mr. Murphy?
I mean, honestly, probably Beverly Hills Cop. I saw that at a very young age. I know I saw 48 Hours as well, very young, but I definitely preferred Beverly Hills Cop. If not just for sort of the side characters around him too, are all really good as well. And it's a little bit more, silly in tone than 48 Hours. But yeah, I mean, ever since I can remember, I've known who Eddie Murphy was. I'm always been a real big fan of his. And he's one of the stars, like, I would equate him to, like, well, not necessarily in what he's done, but to, like, Robert Downey Jr., things like that when they do come back and have another big hit, you're so excited. You're like, yes, I want you back so bad. And like I said, just I've always liked Eddie Murphy. And the thing is, a lot of people, he had his scandal thing with the sort of, the sex scandal with the prostitute and things like that, but that's it. And nowadays, it wouldn't even really be a big deal. It's just, that's it. He's always been sort of private and kept to himself and just really just pumped out good work and taken a lot of chances. I mean, we talked about Vampire in Brooklyn already. And it's like, why is Eddie Murphy doing this? But then again, why isn't he doing it? He wanted to do it because he liked The Hills Have Eyes. I mean, that's just Eddie Murphy, man.
Yeah, that's interesting given he started at 19. There's not like any other big skeletons as of yet revealed from his closet. For sure. Let's hope. Yeah, hope, knock on wood, yes. But I mean, for me, I remember I probably came onto him a bit more like during his family film period. I think probably the earliest thing I probably saw was Mulan, honestly, in a theater, which for the record is really weird given he is the weakest part of that movie and doesn't fit, like, at all. In that fucking movie.
And yet, with that being said, it's still a very, very fun, funny voice acting performance. It's just the character itself doesn't fit in the movie, but he's still really funny.
Well, and if nothing else, it definitely was the precursor to, like, Donkey in Shrek, for sure, with that.
Yeah, absolutely.
But then my dad sort of exposed me, like, oh, what about, like, The Nutty Professor and some of the other family things, and then gradually introduced me more to, like, the more R-rated material. Particularly, I remember watching the Comedy Central edit of Coming to America and loving it, and then he's like, oh, let's watch, like, I have the DVD, let's watch it this way. And I was probably around, like, 8, and that's not a good age to watch.
Yeah, that's a filthy movie.
It's a filthy movie.
What does dumb fuck mean?
Even though it's very weird, that movie is very filthy, but also it's basically structured like a Disney animated, like, Prince or Princess movie.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Because it's basically like reverse Aladdin. Because he's like, Prince turns into pauper to get his girlfriend.
Yeah, it really is. But yeah, that was also one, that and Trading Places as well when I was a kid, because my dad loved both those movies. And I mean, I was a kid watching those as well. Really shouldn't have been.
Right.
I'm so still have such fond memories of those movies, like sitting there laughing because my dad's laughing and almost in tears because he's laughing so hard. So of course, laughter is infectious, and plus you want to laugh with your dad when you're a kid. So I do have fond memories of those, and now I watch them today, and they do still hold up. I mean, Coming to America is very problematic, but it's still funny. The comedy beats still work.
Sure, and Trading Places has no problematic material whatsoever to it.
Well, that's what I meant. I'm sorry. I meant Trading Places. I did not mean Trading Places is very problematic. But, even with all that, there's still great comedic beats to it.
Eddie Murphy is not unfamiliar to problematic territory, particularly if you watch the stand-up specials, which I did rewatch, and particularly, like, Delirious and Raw are just such an interesting watch because it's like every 15 minutes it goes from the most horrific material of the time that doesn't age well at all to, like, brilliance. Absolute fucking brilliance. And it was even notable just because, like, that dude was such a big star, and he was a black entertainer who was, like, that massive a star that really hadn't happened that much prior to this. Like, the closest examples would be, like, a Richard Pryor or maybe a Bill Cosby, which, for the record, the best bit in Raw is still the Filth, Flarn, Filth bit, which ages like a fine wine now.
Oh, absolutely. And, it's funny, you watch Raw and Delirious, and then you watch, like, newer Dave Chappelle stuff, and I mean, does he wearing his Eddie Murphy, influence on his sleeve or what?
I mean, there was the great bit from the SNL that Eddie Murphy returned to, which is probably the best SNL episode in ages, where Dave Chappelle was, like, during the monologue saying, like, I modeled my entire career off of you. That's all I did. It's like, true. That's exactly what you did, Dave.
Oh, man. Not to keep going on about, but that skit, the Home for the Holiday skit from that SNL episode, brings home her white boyfriend. Oh my God, was I dying. And
also a really good use of even some of his older characters, like particularly the Mr. Robinson bit. It's like an actually like, really great update on that particular bit. But we're going a lot on Eddie Murphy in general. We got to get to our specific films, Adam, that we chose at the end of our last episode. We had my 2 bad picks, your 2 good picks, and we ended up with my bad pick, ultimately, of The Haunted Mansion, which we'll talk about first. Afterward, we'll talk about your good pick of Dolemite Is My Name, which will be quite fun to talk about. But let's get first into The Haunted Mansion.
This is the ancestral mansion of the Gracie family. It's a real fixer-upper. With a Victorian ballroom, secret passageways, spacious grounds with room for the whole family, and a mystery that has cursed the house for over 100 years. But no one told the Evers family.
Honey, they have dead people in the backyard.
Dark spirits from the grave, come forth.
Don't you make no dark spirits come out while I'm sitting there. Wait till I leave before the dark spirits come out.
The Haunted Mansion.
So The Haunted Mansion came out on November 26, 2003. Perfect time for a horror-themed film. Thanksgiving.
Yeah.
And is obviously based on the Disney attraction of The Haunted Mansion, which I've talked about before. I'm a pretty big theme park boy, being from Florida. And I would say The Haunted Mansion is probably, like, my favorite overall attraction over there, honestly. I know you're not a theme park guy in general, but you've ridden The Haunted Mansion, I'm sure, before, right?
Yeah, I've been to Disney World and, Epcot and all that stuff. And that is one of, like, the few memories from my childhood that I have of that park is the Haunted Mansion ride. I was absolutely enthralled by it. It's so good.
Yeah, and one of the ones I would argue of the various different ones Disney has done adaptations of for film of their theme parks, like we talked about Country Bears, doesn't really seem like it would work as a film. Haunted Mansion, much more arguably, would work perfectly, especially as like an introductory horror movie for a kid. Would work perfectly.
You would think.
Right. And I think before we go into any of like the huge faults this movie has, I think the biggest trouble I have with it is that it aesthetically is kind of a perfect Haunted Mansion movie. Like, the look of the mansion, the look of the ghosts, some of the cats, even like Terrence Stamp is sort of our main ghost character. It's like, oh my god, this is like so perfect. And even Rick Baker does some of the makeup designs for like the zombies that appear later on. It's like, oh my god, this looks so perfect. And then the trouble is the story has to interrupt.
Yes, I completely agree. Aesthetically, this movie is exactly what you said you think the Haunted Mansion should be as a film, sort of a gateway horror movie for kids where it's still sort of fun and exciting, but aesthetically it's still spooky. Yeah, it looks great. Unfortunately, the padding of this movie and the aesthetic is the only good thing about it. The main story feels like the padding part.
Right. It mainly follows the Evers family, led by Eddie Murphy, who is a real estate overworker, the classic Disney dad trope that worked in, like, Mary Poppins, and they just really bled that trope dry throughout, like, especially the 90s and 2000s, of just, like, you work too hard, and your family doesn't feel like you appreciate them that much. So we're gonna have a wild scheme where we end up, like, going to this mansion over the course of a weekend, and then it turns into a spooky effort here where it's Eddie Murphy as the dad, Marsha Thomason as Sarah Evers, and then their kids are also there, and they have to try and get out of the spooky mansion.
Yeah, that's a good way to describe the plot. The kids are also there.
Mark John Jeffries and Ari Davis as the two kids, for the record. But yes, they are there. One's afraid of spiders, and the other one's about to become a teenager, I guess is her thing.
Yeah, she's tough. I don't know. I don't get it. But yeah, the thing is, it's just everybody around them, even Eddie Murphy, is so much more interesting.
Yes.
Like I said, Terrence Stamp, Wallace Shawn, Jennifer Tilly, they're all so fun in this, and they are totally on board for what it should be. It's just, and Eddie Murphy is for half of it too. When he's playing the sort of fun, comical, scaredy cat part, he's decent. It's just when there's any sort of dramatic emoting or anything, he's just basically, if you even can call it, sleepwalking through it.
Yeah, I think half is very generous. Because I think my biggest problem with Eddie in this movie is that, like, in general, like, Eddie is an odd choice to star in a Haunted Mansion movie on, like, basic principle. But if you think about, like, hey, what if, like, Axel Foley went to a haunted house? That sounds like it could be fun, right? That sounds like it could be, like, a fun horror comedy kind of thing that would really work. But the problem is, like Eddie I've seen in full-on, like, great, brilliant comedic turn, and I've seen an autopilot, where, like, he's not really invested, but he's at least serviceable. And this is just, like, him at absolutely nothing. He's, like, empty on the gas tank, and it's just like, I am a placeholder person here. Because, like, nothing he says is, like, really funny.
No, I agree. It's more reactionary comedy than actual funny jokes. It's just him being scared and freaking out. That's where you're supposed to get your laughs from. And, I mean, that might work for kids. I'm not sure. I've never watched this with a kid. Like, I don't know if kids would like this movie. I know being at the age I am now and everything, there's nothing in this movie that really appeals to me other than aesthetics. And that's really weak too, because sitting through an hour and 45 long movie just because of aesthetics is not an easy feat to accomplish.
For the record, it's 89 minutes, but I get why it felt about that long. Because, like, but I will say, Adam, as someone who, like, I was a kid when this movie came out, and I saw this movie in a theater, I think mainly on the strength of, like, I loved Shrek, I loved, like, the Haunted Mansion especially, and especially this was the same year, we should mention, as the Pirates of the Caribbean coming out, that summer previous. And it was sort of like, oh man, maybe theme park attractions from Disney can, like, make really good movies. And I was pretty excited for this. I don't remember, obviously, like, hating it, I don't think, because I was, like, smaller. I was just like, oh, that was a movie. And I just went on with my day. But yeah, it doesn't leave, like, I guess, like, much of a lasting impression, necessarily. Aside from admitting, like we said, the aesthetic stuff, I think, looks so incredible. Particularly, I think my favorite scene of the movie is when they go into the crypt. And I think has some of the few moments that are kind of funny from Eddie. Where, like, there's a bit where they're getting chased by the zombies, and they go up just like, look, I know you're scared of spiders, son, but everyone's scared. Everyone can be scared. Just open the door. Like, he's really trying to get him to open the door. Some of that stuff is funny, but yeah, it's still very weak on the comedy, but the only thing keeping you engaged at all is, like, I love the look of those ghosts. I love the look of the actual, like, crypt that they're in. It looks so perfect for, like, what would be a fun gateway horror movie.
Yeah, I agree. And Terrence Stamp can really walk down a hallway, can't he?
True, yes.
He does that. He does that quite frequently. But yeah, no, I agree. It looks legit as hell. It's just, And then the weak sort of story behind it, it's something that you've seen 100 times done before, where, the supposedly reincarnated lost love of this ghost or evil person, whatever it is, now come back, and he's going to do whatever it takes to have her. And it's just the only thing they added was that there was a twist that the butler, blah blah blah.
The
And it's
butler
like,
did it. Never.
the butler did it, but I've seen this 100 times done way better and funnier, or even scary. And this is just doesn't hit any of those sort of notches.
There's also one other weird thing, given that like Eddie Murphy and his family are an all-black cast. Like, there's another factor to that, where like you're mentioning the character, the Nathaniel Parker character of Master Edward Gracie, is in love with a woman who looked similar to the Marcia Thomason character. So it's like there's a lot of like really loaded racial implications to that.
Yeah, they dance around.
Oh, they dance around it like some ghosts at the Haunted Mansion ball. They do
Yeah.
not address it more directly than dancing around it.
Where it was, it was a forbidden sort of love, or it was very blah blah blah. And so you get the idea that she might have been a slave or something like that, or like the house mistress.
Especially when it looks a lot like sort of the Disney, the theme park, the outside attraction. So it looks a lot like a plantation, which is, there's a lot of implications to that.
Yeah, but that's the thing, though. That's what makes it an interesting story at the same time.
That would, in theory, but I think the problem is that it's like you're mentioning, is that like it's only really in the casting, and on the page it could have just been like, oh, you were from a slightly lower class family, so we couldn't have you around. Like, it feels like, unfortunately, it could have been switched out with any like white family, pretty much.
That's true. My thing, I agree with you, because my thing is, if you're going to do it, and I understand it's a Disney movie and everything like that, and you don't have to go full bore into it.
No.
But you can still have that be part of it. That she was, one of the servants and things like that. You could still do it without going, like, raising all these issues where kids would be like, what? You could still do it and have it make sense for adults who are watching it, instead of adults watching it go, why are they even trying? Like, just go for it then.
We should mention with Disney, this is at the tail end of the Michael Eisner era. He was a big proponent of like making all these theme park things into movies. And surprisingly, the one that he thought would not work the most would be Pirates of the Caribbean.
Right.
Fucking Michael Eisner. But he...
Lord Farquaad, as he's also known.
That's true. He looks a lot like Lord Farquaad. You can clearly tell this feels so scrubbed in a way of like particularly a lot of like 90s to early 2000s Disney does, where it's like we're going to really balance everything so no one is offended, but also no one's really entertained at the same time, is what it just kind of feels like ultimately with that. And like, even as someone who's like a fan of, that era, like I grew up a lot in that like sort of Disney era, and even going to the theme parks and stuff, there's a lot of references to the ride. Like particularly there's a whole sequence where like Eddie Murphy and the kids are in the carriage, and there's a bunch of fucking Easter eggs that are directly out of the ride that I recognize completely. And I'm like, those are cool Easter eggs. But then you cut to Eddie and he's just like, nice job. Oh man, look out, kids.
Yeah, but here's the thing about that too. They are cool Easter eggs. I get that. But you got to figure they're Easter eggs for people who have actually been on the ride who love it that much. Mm-hmm. For Tom, Dick, and Harry who have never even been there or only been on it once and don't really remember it. So my thing is, if you're going to make it based on the ride, then make it based on the ride. Include those original characters. Really do something fun with them, instead of just having them be sort of window dressing that if it's a blink and you miss it sort of idea.
Right, yeah, particularly when they do the hitchhiking ghosts, which are arguably like the icon of the ride, is like the 3 hitchhiking ghosts. And then they have them actually spout some dialogue, and it's really lame. It's just like, he can't see me.
It's so bad.
It's really bad.
It's so... Yeah. I get why someone like an Eddie Murphy would do this movie. Obviously, it's a big Disney movie. They, pretty good budget. They had success prior with a theme park ride movie.
And he had success with, like, not just, like the Nutty Professor and Dr. Dolittle. Like, this was peak him being in family films territory.
Family comedy, Eddie Murphy. It's just, this is such a miss on so many levels to where it doesn't know what it wants to be. Like you said, it's a classic Michael Eisner to where we don't want to offend anybody. We actually don't even really want to scare the kids. We don't want to do anything like that. So here's just this milquetoast vanilla ass movie that doesn't lean into anything it's trying to do at all. And
I still hope beyond hope at some point we can get another Haunted Mansion related thing. Like for a while Del Toro was going to do like his thing. He announced it like a Comic-Con and I was really pumped for that. And that never really materialized. It keeps like vaguely coming up. at certain points. But he basically kind of took a lot of that design stuff in particular and made Crimson Peak, which has like a similar, like sort of looking aesthetic. And even like there was the rumor that like Ryan Gosling was going to do it, which makes sense if have you seen the video like from a couple of years ago where he was like, he's at Disneyland and somebody asks him about like how the Haunted Mansion over there during like the Christmas months becomes Haunted Mansion Holiday, like from October through December or whatever, like with Nightmare Before Christmas characters.
No. Oh, really? Yeah, I've never seen that.
Right, that happens, but Ryan Gosling is like talking to some random fan who's just like, hey, so how do you feel about like Haunted Mansion Holiday? It's like, it's some fucking bullshit. It should be the Haunted Mansion during October. Fuck the Haunted Mansion Holiday.
I love that guy.
And he would be, I think, perfect for especially like a Haunted Mansion kind of like main character. He feels like he could be one of those portraits in the Haunted Mansion. Like that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, I'll tell you what, for modern Ryan Gosling, if he was going to go into more family-friendly kid stuff, that would be a good vehicle for him.
Right.
Something like that, for sure. I definitely agree. My thing is, just do it animated. Do an animated thing.
True.
That to me, that's the way to do it. Just go animated. Make it fun. Make it a little spooky, animated for kids. But like something like Paranorman or something like that. Do something like that. Could you imagine if Leica got a hold of this? It'd be amazing.
Sure, even like something in the vein of like a Hotel Transylvania. Even I think where it's like more comedy, but even like still has that spooky aesthetic. I think that could really work for Disney. I guess especially before we go into our next feature, I do want to ask, how do you feel about sort of this point in particular of Eddie's career with like the sort of family film aesthetic? Do you feel like this really worked for him, or do you feel like this is where you started kind of tipping off from him?
I think it worked for him as far as making him more accessible to younger audiences. And, it's kind of a smart play where like parents like, oh man, I loved Eddie Murphy. These movies that are of his, like even people my age, like, oh, I loved these movies as a kid, or I've seen these movies. Well, maybe a little bit older than me, but then they start having kids, and yeah, you can take your kids to go see an Eddie Murphy movie, and you're not going to have to worry about explaining, what fuck means or why there's nudity or things like that. So I get it. It's a really smart play to sort of keep himself relevant. Just unfortunately, the material that he started to do, I'd say post the first Nutty Professor, and maybe that's it, because not really a fan of Dr. Dolittle. And other than like Shrek, I'd say it was just real bland stuff like Daddy Daycare and things like that. Just real sort of stereotypical family comedy fare. And I don't think it necessarily hurt him too bad, but it definitely didn't help either.
It's one of those things where he definitely sacrificed any kind of like clout for the sort of like money at that point. Yes. Which, I mean, it really worked for him, obviously, as you mentioned. But at the same time, yeah, like that's the point where Eddie Murphy really became like a joke on his own. Like not too long after this is like them parodying the Clumps thing in Tropic Thunder with Jack Black's character or shit like that.
Right.
Where like they're making fun of just like, oh, he likes doing like the multiple roles, but it's more of a gimmick, and he's sort of become like a parody of himself. And I think that's, at the same time, that kind of is what fueled eventually him doing stuff like a Dreamgirls, or even as we go later on to our next feature. Like, I think it definitely sort of fueled him eventually coming back in his own right after he kind of got stuck in that slump. Especially after this, you get to stuff that like just doesn't like really exist, like Meet Dave, or Imagine That, like no one gave a shit about.
I don't even know what Imagine That is, to be honest with you. Meet Dave, I know of.
Yeah, I mostly know of it, Meet Dave, to be fair, because of the weird car promoting. Did you know about this?
Yes. Yes, 100%. That's what I was going to say. That's the only reason I know it, because of that giant Eddie Murphy head.
Right, where there was, if you don't know, folks, there was a car used to promote Meet Dave that was really just Eddie Murphy's head on wheels.
Yes, how fucking weird and creepy and crazy.
But more importantly, how much would you want to have that as your car?
Oh, dude, are you kidding me? I drive it everywhere. I Tokyo drifted up to the club.
Of course, yes. We've really just floated away from the Haunted Mansion. So, Adam, your final thoughts on the Haunted Mansion?
It's bland. It's boring. It's really, really forgettable. Other than the aesthetics, there's really nothing here. Like, I can't even name you a joke that I remember or that made me laugh in it. There's really nothing here, especially for sort of people my age and your age. It doesn't hold up. There's no lasting power to it. It exists. It was a good paycheck for Eddie Murphy, and that's basically all it is.
And this was my bad choice, and I definitely decided for this, if nothing else, because it isn't at least like the worst of the worst that I could have chosen. Like, Eddie has done such, like the worst I would still say is Norbit, right? That is the worst.
Yeah, if you would have done Norbit, I would have. I wouldn't have quit, but I would have been really upset. And that's what I expect, though, to be honest.
Right, or like Pluto Nash or Beverly Hills Cop 3, like those are more bottom tier.
Yeah, I
Tower heists, shit like that would have been like way more bottom of the barrel material. As opposed to, I think this one's just more frustrating to me as just like a fan of these parks, where in theory they'd be like, oh, it would be perfect for you, but it's like, no, it's just a trouble of like, it has like the skeletal structure of what I would want out of a Haunted Mansion movie. Even like some of the dramatic stuff with the story could have worked if that really dared slightly to lean in a bit further into it. But then they just really hang it so heavily on Eddie Murphy, and he is just not that invested in doing anything. Even as much like you mentioned, like Wallace Shawn is fun, Jennifer Tilly as Madame Leota, like it looks perfect, like, oh my god, this is the ride, just as a movie. And then the trouble is that the movie isn't a movie. it's more of just like a layover for an interesting kind of like Haunted Mansion themed movie that ultimately ends up being nothing. So unfortunately, yeah, it's still a very well-deserved forgotten effort from Eddie Murphy, for sure. But before we get into our good feature, here is a promo for an ESO you can queue up right after ours.
What is the Rusted Robot Podcast? Hey there, this is Sean.
It's Josh.
And this is Kitty.
We're your weekly geekly pop culture news. We talk about comic books,
Movies.
Anime.
celebrity deaths,
Collectibles.
Toys.
movie news,
Upcoming trailers.
and so much more. Check us out on the ESO network and everywhere podcasts are found. Your nerdy news specialists, the Rusted Robot Podcast.
And let's go ahead and get into our good feature now with Dolemite Is My Name.
Hey, you know, Auntie, I was thinking about putting out a comedy record.
Comedy?
I come up with a new character. Dolemite is my name, and fucking up motherfuckers is my game.
All my life, people been telling me no.
Rudy, sometimes our dreams just don't come true.
A man slam a door in my face, I just find another door.
I want the world to know I exist. I get up in that light with my own movie, I could be everywhere all at once. Let's bring Dolemite to the screen.
Action. God damn, Dolemite.
Great God in heaven, you know
So Dolemite Is My Name came out just a couple years ago, October 4th, 2019, on Netflix, and was a big passion project for Eddie Murphy because this is based on a true story. It is about the life of Rudy Ray Moore, who was a comedian, actor, musician, who Murphy kind of looked up to as sort of like an influence. And if you don't know Rudy Ray Moore, he was sort of famous for these very raunchy albums that came out in the 70s that he eventually spun off into a film career, where he particularly played the character of Dolemite, who was sort of like a blaxploitation style hero in some of the weirdest movies that come out around that time, which is saying like a lot. He has like some of the most bizarre sort of films. Were you familiar with Rudy Ray Moore before like watching this, Adam?
I've heard of Dolemite before, you know, just because I went through a little bit of a blaxploitation phase where I was watching Shaft, Foxy Brown, Sugar Hill, you know, The Mac, all those movies, and Black Caesar, and really enjoyed them. Dolemite's one I never really got to, but I've heard of Rudy Ray Moore before because there are some sort of classic hip hop songs by, like, I think KRS-One does one. I think he's mentioned in a Wu-Tang song, things like that, where a lot of you know, sort of old school hip hop guys credit him as one of the fathers of hip hop, and the way he would rhyme and sort of his speech patterns and things like that. So I was aware of who he was, but not to the level while watching this movie I knew anything that was coming.
Right, yes, including Snoop Dogg, who was in the movie briefly, has a cameo, was a very big fan of Rudy Ray Moore, to the point where he said, like, there wouldn't be a Snoop Dogg sort of career without Rudy Ray Moore, because in the movies, Rudy Ray Moore would do these, like, rhyming couplets that you mentioned, sort of like a weird comedy thing, stuff like, they think I'm good and ain't got no class, or I'm gonna rock this shotgun up this motherfucking ass, like, shit like that. Yeah. That's just, like, bizarre, weird shit. But yeah, that really caught on with people, including Eddie Murphy, who was such a big fan, like, he became, like, close to Rudy Ray Moore during, like, his last years, and actually commissioned the writers of this movie, who are Scott Alexander and Larry Karaszewski, to write it, and also, like, met with Rudy Ray Moore to, like, talk about, like, the production of Dolemite and some other things. And those two guys are two of my favorite screenwriters, because they're the team that have done stuff like they wrote Ed Wood, The People vs. Larry Flint, Man on the Moon. I think they're really good, especially at biopic movies about weird outsider types, and this fits perfectly for them.
They got such a handle on doing these sort of obscure character biopics and yet making them relatable. You know, this movie fits right up there with the other ones you mentioned as far as quality as well.
Right, we should mention you picked this as your good pick, but you hadn't actually seen it before because you were kind of saving it for this episode.
Yeah, purposely. Yeah, I purposely avoided it this long because I knew whenever we were doing an Eddie Murphy episode, this was definitely going to be one of my choices. Absolutely so glad that I did, because I watched this the other night not really knowing what I was getting into, because I kind of avoided a lot about it. I didn't know if I was going into a straight comedy or a biopic or a drama or what it was, and I'm pleased to say it's a combination of all of those things, and it works beautifully.
I'm so happy to hear you say that, because I saw this around the time when it came out, and it was one of my favorite movies of 2019. I really loved it, particularly because like I wasn't even I knew of Rudy Ray Moore in a similar way, and I wasn't aware of like just the specifics of it. And actually, before this watch, I ended up watching like the four major ones that he did, the four major films, including Dolemite, The Human Tornado, P.D. Wheatstraw, and Disco Godfather. And having that knowledge only increased really my love of this movie, because Rudy Ray Moore, as depicted especially by Eddie Murphy here, which it's not like the most accurate depiction like the other movies that those screenwriters wrote, but at the same time it gets so much of like the spirit fully alive with like Rudy Ray Moore at this point in the movie is like in his late 40s. He's a comedian who hasn't really made it. He has like some club gigs he's able to do on the side, but it doesn't get him anything big, and he's kind of like looking forlorn and regretful about like, man, I haven't really hit that much. I'm like a has-been. I'm not gonna be able to do anything. And then he decides to come across this character that's influenced by a bit of like knowledge from like black folklore characters that like he, especially a lot of homeless people or even that he meets, or some of like the older folks in his life, like talked stories about a Dolemite and did some of these rapping and rhyming schemes. He ended up kind of integrating that into a character of Dolemite, and it's so great seeing Eddie particularly play this kind of character, because Rudy Ray Moore is weirdly, despite being a hero, like the exact opposite story of Eddie Murphy, where he hit so young, versus Rudy Ray Moore did not hit at all until he was like near 50. And Eddie still is able to like put so much of that enthusiasm and love and affection for this dude who's like saying really dirty, weird shit at a comedy club and rises to the top. It's so endearing to watch.
Oh, absolutely. And the thing is, Eddie Murphy gives it so much heart and just love to it, to where he makes Rudy Ray Moore such a, I don't want to say sympathetic character, because I don't really feel bad for him, because he does ultimately sort of achieve his dream. But he performs it in such a way to where you can see the miles on the character, that he's been trying forever to hit it big. And he's so endearing as a character, and especially the way he, not necessarily self-centered, but he's definitely egotistical in a way where he wants to succeed. He wants everybody to know his name. He wants Dolemite and Rudy Ray Moore to sort of be a household name. But he also is trying to take care of his friends and help people out at the same time. And it's just, the adjective I use for it, it's a sweet movie.
Yes, I think that's perfect. And also, I think that fits a certain thing that not a lot of people talk about with Eddie Murphy, but especially once he hit big around like the late 80s into the early 90s, like he really liked bringing up especially black talent at the time. Like he's the main reason like Chris Rock, who pops up in here, ended up having a career, was like a protege of Eddie Murphy, and he put him in like Beverly Hills Cop 2 and shit like that. He's been doing that throughout like his career. And I feel like that really translates beautifully with like his relationships with like Mike Epps and Craig Robinson and Titus Burgess, who I love from Kimmy Schmidt, is in here.
Yeah, he's really good.
He's really fucking funny. Like, but like he gives these guys like really fun roles, and even especially Divine Joy Randolph as Lady Reed. I love their kinship that they form here. Yes. Or if it's like she says, like they meet at a bar and she's just like, man, I'm not, like, are you hitting on me or whatever? Like I'm not pretty. And she's like this big heavy set like black woman, and he's like, no, like look, I'm not trying to hit on you. I think you have like a lot of chutzpah and charm that I would love to see on like the stage. Quality. Yeah, you got star quality, exactly. You have like a personality like me. Like I'm not the most attractive person. Like they talk about that constantly, how he's like, oh, you're kind of a doughier dude, but he perseveres and makes his own niche.
And I love, again, not knowing the true story. The whole time, at least for the first 20, 30 minutes of their on-screen relationship, I'm like, are they going to get together? And I'm so glad that they didn't, even though I know it's based on a true story, but you're still watching a piece of drama. Mm-hmm. I'm so glad that they didn't, because it just made such more of a beautiful story to where they're just really good friends and they truly care about each other from a friendship perspective, to where, you know, she's eternally grateful for him and he relies on her for just someone to sort of bounce ideas off of and sort of vent to and everything. And she's always there for him. He's always there for her. I just thought it was such a beautiful friendship. You know, it was really, really something special.
Dude, the moment near the end of the movie, like when they go to the film premiere, but like, just like, look, I'm so happy that you gave this opportunity to me, because I've never seen somebody like myself on the screen. Like that's the moment where, honestly, this is a very silly, funny, awesome movie, but like the last 10 or 15 minutes, I'm like in tears. It is such a emotionally honest, beautiful bit.
It's so good. And then he finally gets what he wants, and then you know, he doesn't even go into the show. He comes out there and entertains the crowd, because that's what they're there for, and they're going to be outside.
God, so,
so he's gonna...
And he goes up to that little boy who loves him so much,
gives him his cane. You're like, oh fuck. But you know, since we're talking about the other cast, Wesley Snipes, he is the flat out comedic character in the movie. Like, he is the straight slapsticky comedic character.
He plays Derville Martin, who was like a real actor and guy who directed Dolemite, and apparently had this actual contentious relationship with Rudy Moore and everyone else, where he thought he was too high and mighty because he'd been like in a small part in Rosemary's Baby and shit like that.
Yeah, he was an elevator operator in Rosemary's Baby.
Right. Yes, and this was also not just for Eddie Murphy, like a big comeback, but also even for Snipes, because this is not too long after, like, he had come out of prison and he was doing a lot of straight-to-video, like, bad stuff that was just populating his career. And
the only big screen thing he did after prison, I want to say, was like Expendables 3.
Right.
Other than that, it was just straight to video, straight to streaming sort of action schlock.
Right. And he came back with this, which he'd been like funny in some of his action movies before, but this is his first like full-on comedic performance in at least a long time. And he is so perfect, particularly the bit where they're shooting the car kung fu scene. And he's reacting to it, and he's like putting fucking vodka in his orange juice, and then he's like, oh, how's that? And it's like, I don't see why we would have to do it again.
Yeah, but then my favorite sort of Wesley Snipes bit in this, where he's being so pretentious and he's acting like, you know, he's the greatest actor and like he's so much better than these people. But then when it shows him acting in the movie, he's terrible.
Yes.
He's so bad. It makes it so much like where he gets his comeuppance, but not in the obvious way.
Yes.
It's so good. It's so good.
And even his exit from the movie was just like, well, we're done. Everyone did a great job, but I'm off.
I'll see you at the premiere. Actually, I probably won't be at that motherfucker because I ain't going to be one. But yeah, all right.
He's such a great antagonist, even though at the same time, like, the script still gives him like some interesting bits. Like, I love also how this movie is a movie about filmmaking in terms of just like small things, like when he talks about like Cody Smith McPhee, who plays the cinematographer, who's this like film school kid, and he says like, look, I don't think he's gonna be able to shoot black people. Oh, that's just racist. No, that's like a genuine thing. Like, black people reflect light in a different way than white people do.
Right. And you know, the thing is too, there's that, and then there's also, you know, even the scene where he takes Rudy Moore aside, he's like, you know, use that shit. Mm-hmm. He's like, everything that's been going on, use it. Put it in your character. So he's still trying to make a good movie.
Yes.
It's so expertly done. I absolutely am enamored by this film. Like, after I watched it, I messaged you and like, oh, now I have to watch Dolemite. And I did. And if I hadn't seen this movie, I don't think I could sit through Dolemite. It's so bad.
I will say that like Dolemite, of like the four that I watched, is like, it's interesting just in terms of like, okay, this is a very low budget, badly produced, but kind of entertaining in places, blaxploitation movie. I would firmly recommend to anybody, especially The Human Tornado, which a lot of scenes in this movie are like recreations of sequence from The Human Tornado, particularly the bit where like he's having sex with the lady and he's like, bitch, are you for real? And then he jumps out and the instant replay is going on. That's out of Human Tornado, and that movie's insane. But even then, like, also Petey Wheatstraw is fun, where he plays a comedian who ends up getting murdered by rival comedian comedy club guys, and the devil says, I'll bring you back and you can use a cane to get your revenge if you marry my daughter.
What in the hell?
And then Disco Godfather is about him trying to single-handedly stop a angel dust drug ring. And he's like a former cop / disco DJ who is now like trying to destroy like all the angel dust and ends up going on a weird trip out sequence. It's like one of the most bizarre endings in a movie I've ever seen is Disco Godfather. At some point, we are gonna cover one of those Rudy Ray Moore movies as a bad pick. I'll wait a bit, but we definitely need to cover at least one of them as a bad pick on the show.
I'm totally about that shit.
Yes, but no, at the same time, you still get at least, like, the enthusiasm of, like, a low-budget production. Like, the reason I fell in love with this, really, when I watch is, like, it's everything I love, especially about, like, scrappy weirdos making a movie. Like, it's the Muppet movie. It's, like, the Little Rascals putting on a show. It's not that uncommon from that, but also it adds, like, a bit of, like, the black angle to it in a way that even for, like, it's not just like black guys against like the white Hollywood system. Even like Rudy Ray Moore tries to like make it at like a blaxploitation like production company. They're like, no man, we're not going to do this with you. We get like Fred Williamson and like other people like that. You're not that type. Like this is even lower than like a niche already.
Yeah, we're going to go and do Cornbread Earl and Me, which I don't know if you've ever seen Cornbread Earl and Me, but yeah.
I was not aware that was a real movie. That it makes sense. I could see that being like a late 70s movie in particular.
That's Lawrence Fishburne's first movie. He's a little boy in it.
Oh, wow.
But, and just the caliber of actors that just pop up in these bit parts in this movie. It's pretty fantastic. And, you know, Keegan-Michael Key is really good in it, too. I mean, it's just where he wants to, you know, really do something for the black community. He gets roped into doing this fucking movie, and just his constant looks on his face like, what are we doing? Like, it's so funny to me.
Yeah, and he perfectly captures Jerry Jones, who was the screenwriter guy that worked with Rudy Ray Moore perfectly. Especially, like, I also love how also, just as a thing about, like, not just filmmaking, but, like, writing in general, this movie perfectly captures, like, the awkwardness of, like, writer's block. Like, in the sequence where Rudy Ray Moore is doing the whole, like, I gotta, like, rework this joke and rework this punchline and all this other stuff, it masterfully depicts that kind of, like, frustration and kind of, like, working through the problems while writing stuff down wonderfully. It's a great movie about just, like, any creative process.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's incredibly accurate. In fact, I mean, that's basically what the movie's about.
Yeah.
The movie's about just being a creative person and not finding your outlet properly, you know, until he finally does, and he just capitalizes on it in every possible way, and it ends up not being a huge runaway success for him, but he was still pretty successful with it. And, you know, it's basically the whole crux of the story is you're never too old to sort of go for your dream and achieve your dream. As long as you got the chutzpah and the sort of passion behind it, you can do it.
Right, and even that the dream isn't necessarily being, like, the biggest star in the world. It's finding, like, a following. Especially at this point, like, there's a great sequence where they're trying to sell his record albums earlier on, and he can't, like, get anybody to sell them. And the one production company, like, hears it, and it's just like, oh, what is this going to cross over with whites? It's like, no, it'll cross over with people, like, black people who are able to, like, buy stuff not out of a trunk, like he's doing right now. Like, it shows, like, niche audiences are actually, like, able to, like, glom onto stuff like this. And that it's not even about getting the biggest audience. It's about getting a very loyal, if small, audience to follow you. And it's beautifully tells that kind of story.
Absolutely. I was so happy that I had the opportunity to pick this. If I had watched this when it came out, it would have definitely been one of my tops of the year. For sure.
Yeah, and it's down to, like, we kind of mentioned the ending stuff, but I'm so astonished every time I watch this movie about how, like, phenomenally it earns, like, its beautiful happy ending, and how perfectly it all fits together in a way that it might have been totally accurate to Rudy Ray Moore, but it still fits wonderfully. Even, like you said, like, there's the bit where, like, Eddie Murphy looks off into the crowd and sees everybody, like, adoring him, and later reads, like, come on, let's watch the movie. I've watched it so many times. You watch it. They're out there for Dolemite.
Yeah, they're going to be out there till 2 a.m. The least I can do is give them Dolemite.
Yeah, and it's so wonderful, and really makes you feel like the swell of the movies, the love of the movies.
Yes, I completely agree with you. Absolutely, that's very accurate.
And also, shout out, we haven't mentioned much about him, but the director is Craig Brewer, who previously to this had done Hustle and Flow and directed Coming to America. The only reason I'm at all curious about Coming to America, honestly, at this point, is that he is the director. Because, like, I think, like, this movie looks so stylish in a way that, like, works perfectly for it. Even down to, like, the style that fits appropriately for, like, either when they're up at their height or in the shittiest circumstances. Like, the look of the hotel where they have, like, the studios.
Yeah.
And how perfectly run down it looks.
It's just filled with prostitutes and junkies. and they turn it into their studio. Yeah, it's so cool.
Yeah, I hope like he can at least kind of bring, especially like it's a great example of like a comedy that actually looks good, and how rare that is. Honestly, at this point, it doesn't look like very manufactured. It works so perfectly for like the style of like the '70s era, and even just like the montages that happen. Like I love Craig Robinson like producing the song and shit in the studio, all that other stuff. It's like I love the bit too where Eddie Murphy's like going through the different radio ads, like now playing at the Crown Theater, Dolemite, now playing at this theater, Dolemite. Like it really like captures that kind of like rundown aesthetic, but like the work ethic just in the style of it.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the thing is, this is exactly what old school independent filmmaking was. To where it's up to you, whoever's, writing, starring, directing, whatever you want to call it, to promote the movie and make it get seen. There's no studio behind this. It's all sort of guerrilla roots filmmaking at its finest. And it's perfectly done. Because even in the scenes where, he has to pay $500 to get his movie shown, you're like, oh, fuck. But then he does it, and you're like, oh, yeah, he's successful. And it's another one of those movie moments where you're like, yeah, go, Raymore. It just makes you feel good. There's a lot of feel-good moments in this movie.
Now, I'm also curious, because this skit got Eddie Murphy a lot of acclaim. He got a Golden Globe nomination. What do you think he needs to carry from this if he wants to, like, really, like, I guess, go into his final stage of his career with, like, a good note?
Just the passion behind it. It oozes off the screen that this is something he was totally passionate about and wanted to make and wanted to get seen. And if he can even keep a modicum of that for anything he does next, I mean, then there's no question the sort of twilight of Eddie Murphy's career is going to be incredibly fun, interesting, and successful.
Yeah, if nothing else, I hope he's able to do more stuff with, like, we should mention this is a Netflix movie. Like we talked about last week with Netflix, they have a weird, like, huge variety of movies. And I love the fact they're able to even make something like this, where this is like a mid-budget comedy that would never get made for a theatrical release. Like, never. He would not give a single fuck. He tried to for like 20 years or so, and no one like gave a shit until Netflix like stabbed it up.
Which, to be honest, in a way is a good thing. Because 20 years ago, Eddie Murphy playing this role, I don't think would have worked as well.
No, right. It's weird. He's playing 10 years older than Rudy Ray Moore, but he looks pretty much like in the sort of physical like body type like a Rudy Ray Moore. It's him embracing sort of like his older age in a way he hasn't done before either.
Yeah, I agree. It's him just sort of accepting what he is now and the type of actor he's potentially going to be for sort of the rest of his career. And it's just, even in that level, it's sort of awe-inspiring to where he knows exactly the type of person he is now, that exactly what he can offer now, the type of actor he is. He's not trying to be sort of still the young, fun, hip guy. Like, he's doing parts that are sort of tailor-made for him, and it works just beautifully.
Yeah, I think honestly, I'll spin that off to my final thoughts, where I will say I'm so glad we picked this, because I will genuinely say this is his best performance, I think, in anything, because I think it has the perfect mix of like his dramatic chops and also his comedy chops to make this character who is like so entertaining and so funny consistently to watch, but also is like so charming, and you want to see him succeed. Like you're mentioning, he's the true underdog, especially at like such an older age. He's able to like succeed as much as he has and find an adoring fan base that really like follows him and will be influenced by him later. It's like I said, it's a really silly movie that's so funny throughout most of it, and also has like some of this like filmmaking comedy stuff that like really works. But by the end of it, I'm like tearing up because it's like such a beautifully investing story. And yeah, I would definitely say if you are an Eddie Murphy fan, don't even know that much about Dolemite, see it. If you have Netflix, watch that shit immediately.
Yeah, or if you're even a biopic fan,
Mm-hmm.
I think it's worth it for that. Not even, don't get me wrong, of course, Eddie Murphy being great in it's a huge plus, but just on a biopic level alone, it's pretty fantastic.
Yeah, or even if you want to see, especially like lower scale black artists find success, even it's a beautiful story about all that. But do you have any final thoughts to add, Adam, yourself?
I mean, like I said, it's just this is one that I'm glad I waited to watch. I think it sort of fits perfectly with our topic, especially when we do actor or even when we do director person-centric episodes. This to me is one of the best examples of a really good and a really bad, or even just sort of these different stages in someone's career. It hits on every level. If you're an Eddie Murphy fan, it's worth it. If you're into blaxploitation, it's worth it. If you're into sort of independent filmmaking and how it's done, especially of this era, it's worth it. Or if you just are really into feel good, sort of wholesome biopics, it's worth it for that. This is damn near a perfect movie.
Yes, for sure. But thank you for joining us for that discussion. But stay tuned, especially because we'll be picking our 2 movies for next week at the end of this one. So make sure to stay around for that. But first, we got some feedback to read, because all y'all at DEDBpod on Twitter and Facebook, we ask you every Monday or so about, like, hey, what are your favorite or least favorite things related to whatever topic we're doing? So we asked y'all about Eddie Murphy, and some people contributed, like James Rodriguez, who says, my favorites from Eddie Murphy tend to be when he's allowed to run loose while acting against somebody else, particularly in Coming to America and Trading Places. The excellent Bowfinger shows him into and against type with his dual roles, and even some of his more family-friendly films are worth your time, particularly the first 2 Shreks. The worst films I've seen where Eddie Murphy's on autopilot, opting for poor family films like Shrek the Third or Daddy Daycare, or jumping into a fat suit for cheap laughs like Norbit and especially Nutty Professor 2, The Clumps, with its scene of a giant hamster raping Larry Miller. Jonathan Hampton McHale at Black_Gendo says, Coming to America is my cornerstone Eddie Murphy movie. Eddie's at his best, no matter which character he's playing, while showcasing a jam-packed cast. Dr. Dolittle 2 is the first Eddie Murphy movie to break my heart. Not the worst film, but it led to many non-Shrek flops for Eddie. Christian Alvarez says Eddie Murphy is a comedic talent who has been big since his debut on Saturday Night Live, and hopefully his recent resurgence continues. My favorites of his would be Trading Places, Beverly Hills Cop, Dreamgirls, and Dolemite Is My Name. My least favorites are probably Meet Dave, The Haunted Mansion, and despite being a guilty pleasure of mine, The Adventures of Pluto Nash. The Rusted Robot Podcast, at the Rusted Robot Podcast, fellow podcast on the ESO Network, says, let's say Norbit is the worst and Beverly Hills Cop is the best. Hey Zeus says, best is Coming to America, worst is some Shrek shit, and I guess one where he wears a fat suit. And then Ryan Quarterman, our buddy, says, best Tower Heist, not best Eddie Murphy movie, just best movie, period.
What a fucking trouble that is. But, the thing is, I will say that I think as far as old school Eddie Murphy, comedic Eddie Murphy, I do think Coming to America is probably his best. Trading Places is right up there for me, but Coming to America is just phenomenal. But I do still stick with kind of what you said, and I echo it that, best Eddie Murphy, period, is Dolemite.
Yeah, because, I mean, I would agree. I think Coming to America is, like, the best sort of, like, classic Eddie in particular. I think it has, like, so, like, all the different characters he plays, and also really, once again, giving nice spots for black talent like Arsenio Hall, all the way down to, like, Cuba Gooding Jr. is one of the kids at the barber shop at a certain point. Like, it's such a, like, diverse cast, and it's probably the best, I would say, of him playing different characters in terms of, like, the actual performances. Like, down to even the white Jewish guy. Like, he does perfectly.
Sexual Chocolate.
Sexual Chocolate, of course, perfect.
Sexual Chocolate's so good.
And even just certain people, like, steal even moments from him, like a John Amos. It's just like, look, I'm McDowell's. I'm very different from McDonald's. And shit like that. Or Samuel Jackson popping up as the crackhead very early in his career.
The landlord. I can't remember. I can never remember.
Frankie Faison, I believe.
Faison. Yeah, if you've seen any Silence of the Lambs things. Yeah.
Yes.
He's in everything. But yeah, your rent's due, motherfucker. Don't be pulling that falling down the stairs shit on me.
Yeah, and also it's like I said, it's one of those other examples where like despite like how filthy and R-rated it is, it's also like a weird like romantic story despite that. And I really like the love interest in that movie. Is one of the few examples where like she's not the most developed character, but she makes so much out of like she's a career woman. She doesn't want to like be involved with like the soul glow guy, Eric LaSalle, being so perfect.
Oh, so good. Oh
so
god,
good.
so good.
But I along with like being just so funny, I genuinely get swept up in their romantic encounter. Like it's one of the few times in those 80s comedies where it's like, yeah, I buy that relationship. I think that works.
Yeah, me too. I get why they would appeal to each other.
Right, as opposed to like I rewatched Trading Places. I've said this many times before. I think Trading Places is pretty perfect the first 2/3 of it. And then the moment they get on that train, it starts like it doesn't like sink to the bottom level, but just like it really dips off, I would argue, after that point.
man, I still think it's pretty fucking funny, man. I don't really. To me, there's not really a lull in that movie. I think the movie's pretty solid from beginning to end. I love.
I just think it hits particular heights like earlier on, like especially the bit where Eddie Murphy is like the homeless guy pretending to be like legless, and the bit where the cops pick him up. He's like, "I got legs and I can see." Oh, thank you so much. It's like perfect Eddie comedy beat.
Yes, I am Inga from Sweden, but you're wearing lederhosen. They're fucking up their own plan. So funny to me.
That's around where I'm not as big. It feels very sitcom-y at that point to me when they're the different disguises. Even before Dan Aykroyd comes in with his disguise, I think that just that scenario isn't necessarily that interesting.
Because they're dumb. That's why I think it's funny, because they're all stupid as shit. Like, why would they think this would work? Like, that's why I think it's funny. It's the dumbest scheme. I don't know. I think Trey Place is great. I love the Mortimers.
Oh, of course, yeah. Don Amici and Ralph Bellamy are so fucking funny in that movie.
Your brother's having a heart attack. Fuck him!
Fuck him. Yes. I'll thank you in Sweden when I get the Nobel Peace Prize. If you like that, yeah, really great.
Get out of here. I'll gouge out your eyes and piss out your brain.
Paul Gleason, yes, of course, of Breakfast Club, amongst other things. Yeah. But I mean, I'll also say with like some people mention like Bowfinger, I would say it's not my favorite Eddie Murphy movie, but his turn as the nerdy guy is one of my favorite performances of his.
He's fantastic in it. Other than that, I am not a big fan of that movie, but I think he's really good in it. If you want to talk about something where like sort of the last third of it really sort of gets too silly for me, that Bowfinger's a prime example for me on that, especially the end where all of a sudden they're in a karate movie together and shit. It's just too stupid.
Man, shit like Eddie Murphy doing the audition where like, are you willing to be naked? And he has that weird smile like, I guess, I don't know. It's so fucking hilarious.
And then it's a dude, he's like, you're doing great.
And you know what, doing my research honestly for the show, like I will say The Nutty Professor was one I worried about going back to, but I'll say it like actually holds up a lot better than I remembered, particularly because it's a much more sympathetic portrayal of like larger people than like I remembered, because especially like Sherman Klump, despite being like sort of a comedic character who has like some like a few problems where it's like, oh, your weight gets in the way of this particular bit or whatever, he's a very sympathetic, and they're very empathetic to him and his plight as a character. And if nothing else, like despite like some of the fart jokes or whatever, the scenes where like he's at the dinner table and he is 90% of the characters is like filmmaking magic.
So that's the last good example of Eddie Murphy playing multiple characters.
Mm-hmm.
It's really, really well done, because they're all definable for different reasons too, and they're all completely different. It doesn't, it's Eddie Murphy, but they all feel like their own character. I really still kind of enjoy The Nutty Professor, the first one. The sequel is like, there's no need to talk about it. But yeah, the first one I think is still really cute. And also, I would say a good gateway movie for if you want to get maybe your not young kids, but preteen to early teenager kids into Eddie Murphy. I think The Nutty Professor would be a good example of that.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. One that I hadn't actually seen before but decided to watch prior to the show was Boomerang. And I think it's like honestly a much better movie than people give it credit for. It kind of got like lost in the shuffle of his post Coming to America time. And I think like it's at least interesting for him having like once again so much young black talent at the time, like Halle Berry's first big movie, and the David Alan Grier, fucking Eartha Kitt is like so fucking funny in that movie.
That's the Boys to Men song. Fucking basically made them too.
Yes, that's true.
From that movie, I mean, yeah, I agree. I don't think Boomerang's terrible. It's not great, but I think Boomerang's perfectly fine.
I mean, if nothing else, just for the fact that like it's the first time Eddie Murphy ever worked with a black director and had like such a black cast assembled for a movie that's basically like would be played by like a bunch of white people in like particularly like the Cary Grant era. It feels like one of those where it's just like, oh, I'm a successful businessman who runs a business and I'm kind of in love with this other lady who's a big power type. And just having it be a fully black cast and being like a real adult sort of like story in particular, I think like it's really fun. And I would recommend it to anybody. But what about like the worst What would you say is like some of the worst stuff to you, Adam?
Oh, man. The Golden Child is pretty bad. Obviously, we mentioned Norbit. I can't think of the name of it for the life of me, but the one with him and Jeff Goldblum, where he's like a guru.
Holy Man?
Yeah, that's really bad. 7 words. I think
that's what 1,000 words, sir.
1,000 words, whatever.
You sold them short by quite a bit of words.
Yeah, it's still unwatchably bad. That's the thing. When Eddie Murphy has done bad, they're really bad.
Yeah, that's true. Even like one, I wouldn't say it's really bad. This is one he got a lot of flack for at the time, and I just consider more of like, it's an interesting failure because I saw it for the first time. The only movie he directed of Harlem Nights, which was like a big deal because like he managed to get like Red Fox and Richard Pryor. It was the only movie that like all 3 of them were together. And I give him credit for at least doing that, having once again like a pretty big black ensemble. But I think you really see the pressure of him being like writer, director, and star in that movie, where there's like certain points where he like stumbles over his own words and those takes are like left in the movie. And I'm like really baffled by like, what is this decision? Like there's a lot of weird decisions that just make it like, I get why it was not liked at the time, but it's not like a disaster. It's just like a misstep.
Yeah, I agree. Harlem Nights it's a very interesting prime Eddie Murphy film. There's a lot of potential there. I agree. It's not necessarily capitalized on as well as it could be, but I don't think it's the worst movie he's done by any means.
Yeah, honestly, the saddest thing just watching it is how weird, like, it's not too long before Red Fox died, but he even is more lively than Richard Pryor, who, like, it's been said, like, that was him in full, like, multiple sclerosis territory. Like, not too long after that, he stopped acting, and you can kind of tell he feels kind of stiff. You can't really do much, unfortunately, yeah.
Yeah, but I still think it's a fine movie. It's not the worst. It's not the best. It is what it is. If you don't ever want to watch it, you can skip it. But if you do, I don't think, like, you'd be that offended by it.
There's a lot worse ways you could spend your time watching an Eddie Murphy movie, for sure, as we've mentioned. Great costumes and period production design, though, for, like, that Harlem era. It looks really great. But yeah. And I'll say also, just in terms of, like, we haven't talked much about Beverly Hills Cop. My hot take, I prefer Beverly Hills Cop 2 to 1.
I think I like them both equally, to be honest. I don't think I prefer one or the other. I think they're both really good. It'd be interesting to sort of go back and rewatch them back to back. I haven't done that in a while. But I remember liking both of them pretty equally.
I just remember when I saw Beverly Hills Cop when I was younger, because I was such a big Eddie Murphy fan. I'm like, oh my god, I can't wait. And he's funny in it, but also you can tell that, like, even before I knew about the Sylvester Stallone stuff, like, this is not really a movie. It's just like Eddie Murphy's being funny, and there's a vague plot keeping this together. Whereas I think Beverly Hills Cop 2 kind of went in knowing that would be the case, and is more like, especially stylish, like Tony Scott's direction in fucking Beverly Hills Cop 2 is gorgeous. It's a gorgeous looking movie. There's also a lot more fun stuff, particularly the Gilbert Gottfried cameo. I think is so fucking funny.
Yeah, it's really good. I would also go on and say that I think Another 48 Hours is really good too. Is it as good as 48 Hours? I don't know. But I think Another 48 Hours is a really good sequel.
I've not seen Another 48 Hours, so I can't really judge that.
It's fun, dude. It's good. I don't know if it's as good as the original, but the thing is, it doesn't feel like it's a repeat of the original. And the chemistry between him and Nolte is still really fun in it. Mm-hmm. I like Another 48 Hours. I think it's a pretty decent movie.
But I mean, even the original 48 Hours, obviously, if you've not seen 48 Hours, it's interesting, especially going back to it, because it's a lot more racially charged than you might have remembered it being. And it's even less of a comedy.
Yeah, it's basically a drama action piece.
Right, with just Eddie Murphy has, like, some fun bits, because he's Eddie Murphy. And once again, he's like 21.
I know, he's a baby.
Yeah.
It's literally a baby in it. And well, not literally. That would be interesting. But
48 Hours babies.
I'm surprised he hasn't made a movie where he was a baby. Yeah, 48 Hours is still good, though. I mean, it's still really, really good.
Yeah, particularly, I love it's also one of his best looking movies, like Walter Hill directing it. Like all the stuff in Chinatown looks gorgeous, the way it's lit and everything. It's phenomenal. But thank you all for all that feedback. We also want to thank some other people like Chris Oliver for the intro and outro music used in our show. Listen to more of his music at chrisoliver.bandcamp.com. Thanks to Emily Scarda for the art for our show. And also thanks to our supporters at Patreon, patreon.com/DEDBpod, where you can, for just $1 a month, listen to bonus podcasts we do, or participate in voting for movies and topics that we do for the show. And you can listen right now as we're talking to our most recent bonus episode, where we talk about our top 10 robots in TV and film. It was an interesting, spirited discussion with a lot of twists and turns you might not expect.
Yeah, man, that was a fun one, though. That was a really fun one. I enjoyed doing that quite a bit. I broke the rules a little bit, but I don't give a fuck. It's my show.
He's a rebel, a renegade. Yeah, and of course we can't go too long, by the way, without mentioning robots. Right after we recorded that, we found out the sad news that Daft Punk is broken up.
I know, what the fuck is that? Oh, I don't have enough going on in my life. Way to ruin any modicum of a hope I had for music to be fucking anything anymore. Daft Punk can't make it. What hope do I have with any relationship? Oh,
especially the sad video of just like one of them explodes. Like, Jesus, you're making this really fun.
I know.
By the way, listen to our Tron Legacy commentary for right before Daft Punk broke up. Let's talk about how much we love Daft Punk.
Oh, it's one of the best scores ever done on
yes.
film. But yeah, god damn it.
Well, if you want some joy in your life, why don't you follow us on Twitter and Facebook at DEDBpod, or you can even submit feedback to us, doubleedgedoublebill@gmail.com, all spelled out. And you can also just feel a bit happier by buying some merchandise with our logo on it over at tpublic.com/stores/the ESO Broadcasting Network, where you can buy a t-shirt, a mug, or even a mask to stay safe with our lovely logo.
Yeah, you should, because I'm broke, son.
Yes, we get a bit of a kickback from that, so we would definitely appreciate if you were to buy our merchandise, buy our merch.
Oh, you fucker.
Yep.
You took my critic joke.
I took your thing you took.
I'll give it to you.
But for more of things I take from people, you can find me on Twitter, Instagram, and Letterboxd as @NotTheWho'sTommy. I also do some writing at marianithomas.wordpress.com. And also want to give a shout out to Film Cred, which friend of the show, Sarah Sorrentino, is the big person behind that. On their Patreon, they put out a zine every month with articles and stuff, and they're doing one for a puppet zine where they're talking about like Muppets and other stuff. And maybe, it's not a bad time to become a patron, because you can also read a little blurb I put in about the Muppets myself.
Oh, shit. I am on Twitter and Facebook at Atom or Adam. It's ATOM_ADAM. You find me on there. It's mostly just random thoughts or pictures of paintings I've done or things like that, or my dogs. But yeah, if you want to find me on there, go ahead and send me a follow request on Instagram or follow me on Twitter. I'll engage, I'll share your stuff. And one thing I want to add, because if you do follow me on Twitter, you've probably seen, I'm going through things in my personal life, as we all are. And I just want to say to everybody who's listening, things are hard right now for everybody. But fact of the matter is, it could always be worse. You can always survive. You are good. You are a strong person. Don't let anything beat you. Get good people in your corner. And that's one thing I want to say to you, Thomas. I thank you for always being there for me every week, always being there for me when I need someone to talk to. You've made sort of this last year and a half, or however long the goddamn pandemic's been, last 5 years, if you want to call it that, much easier to navigate through. And for that, I will always be eternally grateful to you. And if I'm able to do that for anybody who's listening, you don't have to thank me. I just hope that, if you're our listener, we care about you and we do love you.
Oh, Adam, I'm getting all verklempt over here. I didn't expect this at all. I'm genuinely touched. And if you want to be genuinely touched in your own way, why not subscribe to us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, and other podcasting platforms? If you're listening on ESO, why not dig into the other great shows that are on the network? Or you can go ahead and get into our archives on our Podbean channel for a bunch of episodes even before we started posting with ESO. And if nothing else, if you can't buy our merch, if you can't be a patron for just $1, we would really appreciate the absolute free publicity of you rating, reviewing, or sharing the show around to give us a bit more visibility out there. Grow the cult. We want to be like a Dolemite style cult. We want our niche to really grow.
Yeah.
Yes, well said. Now, Adam, it's time to end the show, but first we gotta do our one last thing here, which is our picking for next week. And we've already gotten half of that done, because over at patreon.com, you all voted, you edgelords, for one of the picks for next week's topic, which, in honor of Raya and the Last Dragon, is coming on Disney Plus for the weird premiere pricing thing they're still doing, like they did with Mulan, which is a bummer because I'm curious about that movie, but I'm not going to pay $30 for that along with my Disney Plus thing. No. You all over there helped pick for the Disney Animated Features canon episode that we're doing next, which, for the record, is any of the movies produced by Walt Disney Features Animation, not Pixar, not any of the subsidiaries, the main arm that's been making movies since 1937 with Snow White all the way to Raya and the Last Dragon here in 2021. And I'm excited. We've kind of dipped in these waters before, but it's been a while, Adam. I'm curious to get back into this well.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, let's face it, if you like movies, period, chances are you are either a Disney fan or, well, actually, no, chances are nowadays you like a Disney movie, whether it's the animation or something else they sort of have acquired. But the fact of the matter is it all starts somewhere. And I think that sort of the Disney animation zeitgeist, if you want to call it that, or whatever you want to call it, is one of the most important sort of movements in film history.
Though none of them match up to the greatest Disney film of all time that we discussed here, The Haunted Mansion. None of them.
No, Country Bears.
Oh, that's true. Country Bears is slightly better. You're right. Good point.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Yes. But Adam, you had the bad picks for this. I had the good picks. And usually we would each pick a number between 1 and 10 for each other's choices. And that gets us the good and bad feature for next week. But like I said, the patrons over at patreon.com/DEDVpod voted for your bad pick, which was between Brother Bear and then the ultimate winner, which was The Black Cauldron, the infamous sort of black sheep of the Disney Animated Features canon.
Thank you, edgelords, by the way, for picking Black Cauldron. I did not want to sit through Brother Bear. But Black Cauldron, if you don't like it, it's at least fascinating.
That's true. There's a lot that we're going to be able to discuss next week. But Adam, I have my 2 good picks. So go ahead and pick a number between 1 and 10 for him.
Let's go number 2.
Okay. At number 3, I actually had a movie that at least meant a lot to me when I was younger. I've seen it since, and I still really enjoy it and think it's underrated in certain aspects, but it's definitely got a fair share of problems. I have the 1996 feature, The Hunchback of Notre Dame.
Ooh. All right. That's one of my wife's favorites. I think I've seen that in its entirety once. I was not a fan of it when it came out, so that'll be interesting to revisit. I've seen bits and pieces of it, but yeah, that'll be interesting. All right. And what was your other pick?
At number 7, I had one of the classics, the second feature in the Disney animated canon, Pinocchio.
I got to tell you, I'm glad we didn't get that one.
Okay.
It's not that I don't like. It's not that I don't like it. It's just I've seen that movie 8 million times. And to the point to where I've almost lost appreciation for it because I've seen it so many times. It's almost like a comfortable shoe that you've worn to beat to shit, and now you're just like, I got to get new shoes.
A shoe made by the toy maker Geppetto.
Yeah. Well, at least we get to spare ourselves a lot of the bad Italian sort of accents.
What are you talking about? My authentic Italian accent?
Not counting your own.
No, of course.
Not counting your natural speaking voice. Like, you think you sound like a normal person. You don't. Hey, pick a good movie. It's a good, huh?
Every time we turn off the mics, folks, that's our after chatter talk. Sounds exactly like that. But yeah, so Hunchback of Notre Dame and the Black Cauldron. Two of the lesser sort of beloved, I would say, of the Disney animated canon. That'll be fascinating.
Yeah, for sure. I'm excited for it.
Yes, but until next time, everybody, it's time that, Adam and I get out of here and go to our spooky haunted mansion over in the swamps. I'm sure it'll be fine and no ghosts will show up.
Buy our stuff! Buy our stuff!
Good night.
This has been a broadcast of the ESO Network. Be part of the crew and help support our shows by donating to our ESO Patreon or by shopping at the TeePublic store, which can all be found at www.esonetwork.com. The ESO Network, your station for all things geek.